You trudge up the shining slopes of Mount Olympus, where everything gleams too perfectly, like a stage set designed to distract you from what's really happening behind the curtains. Marble pillars rise like frozen waterfalls, and golden light spills over rooftops as if the entire place were under some eternal sunrise. But don't be fooled by the serenity. You're walking into a web of lies thick enough to choke a titan. Zeus, Lord of the skies, lounges on his throne, draped in silk and smug satisfaction, already plotting his next betrayal before you even catch his eye. He's not some noble protector of justice, as mortal prayers might hope. No, Zeus is a strategist of desire. His affairs aren't random whims. They're calculated moves to expand his influence, ensure his offspring carry power, and manipulate divine politics. His lovers range from goddesses to shepherd girls, each encounter more elaborate than the last. He shifts forms like a seasoned illusionist. A bull, a shower of golden rain, even a swan. It's as if seduction itself is a weapon, wielded as skillfully as a sword. Here's a fact most people gloss over. Ancient Greeks revered Zeus not just as the thunder-wielding god, but as the upholder of law and order. Ironically, his private exploits tore those bonds apart, producing orphans, resentments, and rivalries that shaped entire mythologies. Historians still argue whether these stories were exaggerated warnings or reflections of real anxieties about male authority and lineage. One quirky detail: the myth of Leda being seduced by Zeus in swan form likely echoes ancient fertility rites where animals symbolized power, rather than literal shapeshifting. Some scholars even debate whether these transformations are metaphors for persuasion and consent, rather than deceit. And Zeus' betrayals ripple outward like expanding circles. Hera, his wife, watches from her gilded chambers, fury brewing. Her jealousy isn't the petulance of a scorned spouse. It's a calculated campaign of revenge. She targets the children, the women, anyone connected to his conquests. You've probably heard of her turning lovers into beasts or driving them mad. But historians still argue whether these punishments reflect moral justice or ancient anxieties about broken familial ties. In the background, other gods watch in silence. Hermes grins knowingly, Apollo stares with half-lidded boredom, and the muses quietly record the tragedies that unfold. There's a rhythm to it all. Seduction, betrayal, retaliation. Repeat. The entire mountain breathes like a beast caught in endless cycles of lust and power. You might wonder, as you sit quietly absorbing it all, whether Zeus' web of manipulation is monstrous, or if it's simply human ambition magnified through divine storytelling. Either way, once you glimpse the mechanics of Olympus, you realize the god's secrets are far messier, far darker, and far more relatable than any sermon ever hinted. You follow the scent of fear down the jagged cliffs where Cronus, Lord of the Titans, broods like a trapped storm. The air feels heavy here, thick with the metallic tang of impending doom. His eyes dart constantly, clouded with paranoia, and for good reason. He's consumed by one terrifying prophecy, that one of his own children will overthrow him. Imagine living every moment with that dread gnawing at your bones, like a rat that never leaves your pantry. Cronus isn't some ancient villain with a taste for cruelty for its own sake. His actions are driven by terror. To prevent fate from catching up with him, he swallows his newborn children whole, one by one, as soon as they emerge into the world. Each infant cries, barely touched by life, before vanishing into the Titan's stomach, leaving behind nothing but blood-streaked swaddling cloths and hushed whispers among the nymphs. It's horrifying, yes, but also tragically human. The desperate attempt to control destiny, to outwit the future. Here's a historical fact that makes this grim tale even more chilling. Ancient agricultural societies feared cyclical change. Seasons turning, harvests failing, younger generations overtaking elders. Cronus devouring mirrors that anxiety, a myth born from a deep cultural fear of losing control over time and inheritance. Some scholars still argue whether the story symbolically represents the practice of ancestral burial rites or rituals meant to appease the forces of time. But there's a fringe angle, too, one scholars often scoff at but you might find strangely plausible. Some ancient interpretations suggest Cronus wasn't literally eating children, but rather separating them from their mothers through symbolic rites or spiritual consumption, where the infant's life force was believed to be absorbed into the earth to preserve fertility. In this reading, his monstrous hunger is more metaphor than murder. The secrecy surrounding Cronus' actions is almost suffocating. He doesn't flaunt his deeds. Servants avert their eyes. The gods in hiding whisper in corners, fearful of speaking aloud what they already know. Even Rhea, Cronus' wife, moves like a ghost, eyes hollow from grief but determined to protect her youngest child. One of the strangest details? When Rhea gives birth to Zeus, she wraps a stone in swaddling clothes and presents it to Cronus as if it were her newborn. Cronus, fooled or too weary to question, swallows it whole. This deception, passed down for generations, is sometimes viewed as an early form of symbolic substitution, where ritual objects are used to mask or transform painful truths. Historians still argue whether this story served as an allegory for the agricultural harvest, where older growth is devoured by new shoots, or whether it reflects a darker cultural memory of infanticide disguised as cosmic necessity. As you watch Cronus pacing, his hands clench tight enough to whiten the knuckles. It's impossible not to feel the crushing weight of his choices. You wonder whether fear can ever justify betrayal, or if, once unleashed, it feeds on itself until there's nothing left but ruin. You move deeper into the halls where Hera waits, gleaming, composed, but with a simmering rage that could ignite the whole mountain. Her eyes are sharp as obsidian, fixed on the endless parade of lovers Zeus has brought into the world. You can almost feel the heat rising from her, not just as spousal jealousy, but as a deliberate force of nature, like a slow-burning wildfire consuming everything in its path. She doesn't shout or wail, no melodrama here. Hera plots, calculating each punishment with the precision of a chess grandmaster who has learned the art of cold vengeance. Hera's wrath isn't random. She targets the collateral damage, Zeus' mistresses and, worse, their children. You witness the quiet cruelty that defines her. She doesn't kill for spectacle. She destroys lives to dismantle Zeus' legacy. Lovers are transformed into beasts, driven mad by curses, or left in exile, stripped of dignity and hope. Children, half divine and innocent, are orphaned, hunted, or warped by forces far beyond their control. It's an empire of quiet suffering, orchestrated behind closed doors with the finesse of someone who knows that the most devastating betrayal doesn't always scream. It whispers. Here's a fact to ground this in history. Hera was venerated as the goddess of marriage and protector of women, especially in childbirth. That makes her relentless vengeance all the more ironic. She punishes others for exactly what she herself represents. Scholars still debate whether Hera's actions reflect societal attempts to enforce patriarchal structures or serve as narrative warnings about the consequences of divine infidelity. One quirky detail: in some myths, Hera disguises herself or uses potions and charms rather than brute force to enact her punishments. She's a master manipulator, preferring schemes to direct confrontation. Some even say she cultivated alliances with other gods, turning subtle influence into a web of control. A fringe interpretation suggests Hera's vengeance mirrors real-life anxieties surrounding motherhood and inheritance. Some ancient rites centered around protecting legitimate heirs, and Hera's fury may have been an amplified reflection of women's powerlessness in a world dominated by male gods and men alike. There's scholarly debate about whether Hera's punishments were considered acts of justice or symptoms of divine cruelty. Some ancient storytellers cast her as a righteous avenger, others as a tragic figure consumed by rage. Either way, her silence is more terrifying than open fury. The punishments she plots ripple through families, kingdoms, and generations, shaping histories you're only beginning to glimpse. You sit beside her, barely breathing, as she methodically plans the next strike. Not with swords or lightning bolts, but with secrets, humiliation, and subtle torment. Hera's betrayal isn't loud. It's intimate. It's the slow unraveling of trust, the suffocating isolation of those caught in her crossfire. And as you watch, you wonder how many betrayals go unnoticed because they never need to be shouted aloud. How often is power wielded through quiet, precise cruelty rather than grand gestures? You realize Hera's wrath isn't madness, it's method, and that makes it all the more terrifying. You follow the whispers down a corridor lined with flickering torches, and soon you find Prometheus, the titan with eyes full of restless fire. He's no brute like Cronus, no vengeful wife like Hera. Instead, he's a thinker, a rebel, a figure whose defiance is wrapped in compassion, and whose betrayal will cost him everything. He stands apart from the others, his posture tense but proud, as if he knows he's walking willingly into doom for the sake of something greater than himself. The air around him shimmers, heavy with the smell of burning resin and smoldering stone, like a sacrificial altar waiting to be claimed. Prometheus' betrayal isn't against a lover or a family member. It's against Zeus himself. He gifts mankind fire, that primal tool of survival and creativity, stolen from the god's own hearth. Fire, after all, is more than flame. It's technology, knowledge, civilization's spark. You feel the weight of his choice. He's risking immortality for mortals, trusting a species he knows is flawed, greedy, and fragile. It's a gamble worthy of both admiration and heartbreak. Here's the historical fact that anchors the myth. Fire was central to ancient life, used for warmth, cooking, metallurgy, and ritual. Many cultures mythologized its discovery as a divine gift or forbidden knowledge. In Greek tradition, Prometheus' theft symbolized humanity's struggle for independence and self-sufficiency. Yet historians still argue whether this myth was originally about technological progress or about forbidden knowledge that should remain out of reach. One quirky detail: some versions of the story claim Prometheus hid fire inside a hollow fennel stalk before gifting it to humanity, a plant not usually associated with flame. Scholars debate whether this odd choice reflects ancient agricultural practices or encoded symbolism linking fertility and survival. A fringe theory even suggests that Prometheus' punishment, the binding to a rock where an eagle eats his liver daily, is a distorted memory of ancient medical or initiation rituals, where flesh was symbolically consumed and regrown in cycles. Whether literal or metaphorical, the torment underscores how dangerous compassion could be in a world ruled by power. Prometheus knew the cost. Zeus would never forgive the betrayal. The eagle that tears at his liver endlessly is less about punishment and more about cosmic warning. That empathy toward mortals, misplaced trust in fragile creatures, leads to ruin. Yet, some scholars still debate whether Prometheus' act was pure altruism or a calculated rebellion against Zeus' autocratic rule. You watch him stand against the storm clouds gathering overhead, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. He doesn't flinch as chains snake around his limbs or as the eagle descends with cruel precision. There's a quiet dignity in his suffering, a kind of grim humor that makes you catch your breath. You realize that betrayal isn't always about selfishness. Sometimes it's about breaking the rules for a cause you believe is worth the sacrifice, even when everyone else calls it madness. Watching Prometheus accept his fate, you wonder how often the bravest choices are the ones that look like betrayal to those in power. You descend now into a grand hall lit by golden lamps, heavy with the scent of roasted meats and wine poured too freely. A long table stretches before you, laden with platters of spiced lamb, roasted fowl, and flaky breads glistening with oil. Yet beneath this abundance, a darker hunger lurks, a betrayal that festers not in the shadows, but right at the table where people gather in trust. You sit at the edge of the hall and watch Pelops, Prince of Pisa, reclining with ease, unaware that every bite he takes is seasoned with deceit. The tale begins with Tantalus, Pelops' father, whose relationship with the gods was already strained by hubris and defiance. In an act so horrific that even the gods recoiled, Tantalus invited them to a feast where he served his own son, cooked and prepared as meat. Some versions say he sought to test their omniscience. Would the gods recognize the dish? Others hint at madness, or the hope that by feeding them flesh, he could gain immortality. Whatever his motive, this was a betrayal at its most intimate. A father weaponizing trust, turning nourishment into desecration. Here's a historical fact that anchors the myth in ritual practice. Many ancient cultures performed sacrificial rites, offering food or symbolic flesh to deities in hopes of securing favor, fertility, or protection. Tantalus' act, horrific as it sounds, may reflect a twisted exaggeration of sacrificial traditions gone awry. Scholars still argue whether the myth grew from real rites or served as a cautionary tale warning against overreaching ambition. A quirky detail? Some versions of the myth say that the gods, horrified, refused to eat except for Demeter. Distracted by grief over her missing daughter, she ate a piece of Pelops' shoulder. It's strangely macabre, but also strangely human. Mourning can blind judgment. To this day, some scholars debate whether this reflects the ancient association between grief and ritual impurity. A fringe interpretation proposes that the myth encodes the dangers of royal power and the anxieties surrounding inheritance. Feeding a child to the gods might symbolize how political ambition devours the next generation, literally sacrificing family bonds for survival or dominance. The gods, of course, eventually resurrect Pelops, but not without consequences. His shoulder is replaced with ivory, a gleaming, unnatural piece that forever marks him as someone who survived betrayal by blood. Historians still argue whether this detail reflects early associations between luxury goods and violence, or whether ivory's symbolic purity stands in contrast to the horrific act it replaced. What makes the betrayal more haunting is that the feast itself was meant to celebrate kinship, alliance, and shared prosperity. The table, where hands should clasp and stories be shared, is instead turned into a stage for treachery. Every bite, every toast, every smile is undercut by the knowledge that trust has been weaponized. As you sit quietly, watching Pelops raise his cup, unaware of the horrors that have already been enacted upon him, you can't help but shudder. Betrayal, it seems, wears many faces. Sometimes it's rage, sometimes ambition, and sometimes it's a twisted test of loyalty gone disastrously wrong. You wonder how often betrayal masquerades as tradition, how often blood is spilled in the name of honor, and how easily the familiar becomes sinister when fear and greed take hold. You follow the trail of whispers into a quiet garden where bitter herbs grow in neat rows, their leaves trembling in the soft breeze as if aware of the darkness that coils among them. There, seated beneath a twisted olive tree, is Medea, princess, sorceress, exile. Her eyes flash like polished obsidian, sharp and calculating, but behind them churn grief and fury that run deeper than any ocean. The air is thick with the scent of crushed plants and something far darker, like iron and smoke. You sit beside her, and for a moment you wonder if you should turn back. But curiosity pulls you closer, deeper into the web she spun. Medea's betrayal is one born not of blind rage but of carefully honed vengeance. She once loved Jason, the famed Argonaut, helping him steal the golden fleece with spells and cunning that defied even the gods. She crossed seas, killed kin, and shattered her homeland. All for him. But love, it turns out, is fragile when ambition grows teeth. Jason, once devoted, casts her aside to marry a princess of Corinth, seeking power and prestige at the cost of loyalty. You watch Medea's jaw tighten as she plots. Not a rash, screaming retaliation, but a patient, methodical unraveling. She doesn't scream or brandish swords. Instead, she weaves poison into gifts, deceives through smiles, and crafts curses that settle like venomous fog. Her revenge spirals outward, consuming not just Jason's new bride, but his entire household. Her heartbreak becomes strategy, and strategy becomes destruction. Here's a historical fact to ground the myth. In ancient Greek culture, betrayal within marriage was among the gravest offenses, and women's agency in such matters was often suppressed or weaponized. Medea's extreme actions reflect anxieties about women's power, autonomy, and the consequences of crossing societal expectations. Scholars still debate whether Medea is a villain or a tragic figure shaped by systemic injustice. One quirky detail: some sources say Medea employed poisons derived from herbs and minerals, early forms of pharmacology and chemistry, making her not only a wronged lover but one of myth's most infamous practitioners of proto-science. Historians argue whether these elements reflect real medicinal knowledge or a later embellishment designed to dramatize her cunning. A fringe theory proposes that Medea's story encodes initiation rites in which women, marginalized by patriarchal control, reclaimed power through ritualized rebellion. Her acts, horrifying as they are, may have served as allegories for hidden resistance rather than sheer vengeance. What's even more haunting is how easily love and betrayal intertwine. Jason's ambition blinds him to Medea's sacrifices, while Medea's love blinds her to the humanity of those around her. The result is a betrayal that doesn't announce itself with a scream. It simmers, grows, and erupts like a slow-cooking poison. You feel the ache of it, the way trust, once shattered, can spread like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Medea's betrayal isn't just about one man's broken promise. It's about how desperation twists the heart, how wrongs unaddressed become wounds that never heal. As you sit in the garden's shadow with her, the silence hums with menace. It's a betrayal that whispers rather than shouts, a slow, relentless undoing fueled by heartbreak, intellect, and vengeance. You can't help but wonder, when love and pride collide, how far will one soul go to ensure that betrayal cuts deeper than any blade? You walk into a hall heavy with the scent of sea salt and blood, a place where victory should be celebrated, but instead stinks of something rotten, like a carcass left too long in the sun. Agamemnon stands at the center, wearing his armor like a second skin, his face drawn tight with exhaustion and grim satisfaction. He's just returned from Troy, his army triumphant, ships laden with spoils, bards already composing songs of glory. But something darker coils beneath the cheers and triumphal speeches, and you feel it immediately, like a draft slipping through a crack in the door. His homecoming should be a moment of reunion, relief, and honor. Yet the very walls of his palace seem to whisper betrayal. Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, who once wept in longing, now watches with cold calculation. Her grief over the sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia, hangs thick in the air, suffocating every greeting, every embrace. You see it, the festering wound beneath the velvet cloths and golden vessels. The betrayal isn't born overnight. It's crafted through years of silence, resentment, and unhealed loss. Clytemnestra's vengeance is meticulous. She invites her husband to a lavish feast, where every dish is rich, every cup overflowing. But beneath the platters lie knives, and beneath the smiles, oaths of retribution. She lures him into trusting his surroundings, into believing that domestic peace has returned. Then, in a final act of betrayal, she orchestrates his murder, blade flashing before the last toast is raised. Here's a fact to ground this. In Greek tragedy, the homecoming Nostos was as fraught as the battlefield. Returning heroes often faced retribution, and Clytemnestra's act reflects anxieties surrounding familial duty, honor, and the cost of war. Historians still debate whether her revenge was justified or purely monstrous, and interpretations swing between empathy and condemnation. One quirky detail: some versions say that Clytemnestra used her own lover, Aegisthus, to help carry out the plot, weaving passion, politics, and betrayal into one tangled net. Others suggest that she performed ritual purification before the murder, as if cloaking the crime in sanctity, a chilling blend of vengeance and religious duty. A fringe interpretation argues that Clytemnestra's actions mirror real struggles faced by women in patriarchal societies, where grief and anger were forced inward until they exploded in symbolic gestures of power. Some scholars even suggest that her act was a form of justice, a restoration of moral balance in the face of war's cruelty. What's haunting is that the betrayal doesn't come from a foreign enemy or a rival king. It comes from within the home, from the very person who once stood beside him in love and duty. Agamemnon's downfall is slow, a web spun over years, tightened with patience and cold precision. As you sit at the edge of the hall, you feel the weight of it pressing down on you. You can almost hear the whispers of servants, the creak of polished floors underfoot, the clink of goblets masking the sharpened blade. It's a betrayal that festers quietly before erupting in bloodshed, a warning that the deepest wounds are often homegrown. You wonder how often the greatest treacheries come not from enemies on the battlefield, but from those closest to us, those we trust with our most vulnerable selves. And you realize that in the world of gods and kings, a feast can be as deadly as any war. You sit beside a crackling fire on the windswept plains outside Troy, where Achilles' armor gleams even in the fading light. His silhouette is hard and proud, carved from bronze and willpower, and yet his eyes betray something softer, something vulnerable, raw, and painfully human. Near him sits Patroclus, quieter, gentler, always close but never overshadowing. You feel the bond between them like a thread stretched taut between two hearts, strengthened by shared battles, secrets whispered in the dark, and an unspoken loyalty that defies war's cruelty. But trust, you soon learn, can be a fragile thing. Their friendship is legendary, praised by soldiers and feared by enemies. Achilles, with his unmatched prowess, relies on Patroclus not only for companionship but for counsel. Patroclus, in turn, finds purpose in Achilles' brilliance, his loyalty unwavering even as he watches his friend burn with pride, anger, and grief. Their bond feels unbreakable, until fate intervenes with a tragic twist that exposes how even the deepest connections can harbor secrets and regrets. You witness the turning point. Achilles withdraws from the war after a dispute with Agamemnon, leaving the Achaean forces vulnerable. Patroclus, desperate to protect their comrades, begs Achilles to let him wear his armor and lead the charge. Achilles, reluctant but moved by concern, finally agrees. Patroclus dons the gleaming breastplate, the crested helmet, and rides out with fierce determination. He fights valiantly, saving countless lives, but the ruse is doomed. Here's a historical fact woven into this myth. The ancient Greeks highly valued personal honor and loyalty, often equating friendship with sacred duty. Achilles' deep bond with Patroclus reflects this ideal, even as the events surrounding it highlight how war's pressures can corrode even the strongest alliances. Scholars still debate whether their relationship was purely fraternal or laced with deeper affection. A quirky detail? Some ancient sources hint at a romantic connection between Achilles and Patroclus, suggesting that their bond transcended mere camaraderie. Later storytellers, especially in classical poetry, read their loyalty as an expression of profound love, while others dismissed it as embellishment or moral anxiety. The debate continues even today. A fringe interpretation views their story as an exploration of masculinity's vulnerability, how warriors, bound by codes of strength and endurance, secretly crave emotional intimacy but fear the judgment of peers. In this reading, Achilles' refusal to openly grieve and Patroclus' quiet devotion reveal societal expectations that crush tenderness beneath heroic duty. The betrayal, you realize, isn't a sharp stab. It's woven from silence, pride, and an unspoken assumption that love can survive neglect. Achilles' trust in Patroclus blinds him to the risks, while Patroclus' desire to protect the wounded blinds him to his own mortality. As you sit by the fire, you feel the tension crackle in the air like sparks about to leap. The battlefield glory that Achilles craves is a double-edged sword, and Patroclus' loyalty, noble as it is, becomes a fatal burden. Betrayal here isn't an act of malice. It's the tragic consequence of misplaced trust and unspoken longing. You wonder, how many friendships fracture not because of betrayal in the moment, but because pride keeps words unsaid and hearts guarded? How often do secrets, however well-intentioned, lead to devastation when left in the shadows? You stare at their intertwined fates and realize that even the strongest bonds can shatter under the weight of expectation, grief, and the relentless march of war. You walk along the shores of Troy as dusk falls, the horizon bleeding into shades of deep purple and amber, and the smell of sea brine mixes with the faint smoke rising from distant campfires. The city walls stand tall, defiant, but there's a restlessness in the air, as if the very stones know something ominous is coming. Soldiers murmur in hushed tones, campfires flicker with nervous energy, and scouts return with reports that bring only silence. Then, like a specter from some half-remembered dream, the wooden horse appears, massive, hollow, and gleaming as if carved by the gods themselves. You stop, staring at it, and immediately feel that something is wrong. The Trojans' excitement is almost childlike at first. The horse is presented as a gift, a trophy of victory from their enemies, left at the gates and abandoned. A peace offering, they're told. Its craftsmanship is exquisite, the wood polished, adorned with golden accents, gleaming like an offering to the gods. But no one quite remembers who left it, or why it's so enormous, or why it arrived without fanfare. Yet hope overrules suspicion. They debate, argue, and laugh, until curiosity and pride win out. They haul it inside the city, unaware that betrayal waits inside, crouched in silence. Here's a fact rooted in tradition. The story of the Trojan horse likely draws from early siege tactics and trickery used in warfare, diversionary tactics, decoys, and night raids, while historians still argue whether the horse was ever real or purely symbolic. The myth reflects the very real fear of how war's most dangerous weapons are often the ones that masquerade as peace. A quirky detail? Some ancient versions describe the horse being so large that it took many men, ropes, and pulleys to move it. Others insist the entire Greek force had hidden inside, though that would have been physically impossible. Some scholars believe the horse may have been a metaphor for an underground tunnel or siege tower, ingenious devices hidden in plain sight. A fringe theory goes even further, proposing that the horse represents an early psychological tactic, an exploit of trust, pride, and desperation. Rather than a literal horse, it may have been a ruse, a distraction meant to lower defenses. Historians still debate whether it's a cautionary tale about gullibility or a dramatized version of real warfare. What makes the betrayal so insidious is that it doesn't come from an open assault but from the Trojans' own desires. They want to believe the war is over. They want peace more than they fear the unknown. Their eagerness blinds them to danger. Even the city's wisest, Priam, and the prophetess Cassandra, are ignored when they urge caution. The horse stands there, a gleaming monument to the Trojans' hubris, while the night deepens and shadows lengthen. Beneath the wood's polished surface, the Greek warriors breathe in the darkness, waiting for the signal to strike. The silence is heavier than armor. It presses against your skin as if warning you. You realize that betrayal doesn't always wear a mask of anger or hatred. It can arrive disguised as a promise, a reward, or a sign of hope. It's the betrayal of trust, of dreams, of the very things that make you vulnerable. You wonder how often the threats we ignore aren't enemies at all, but gifts, too perfect to be questioned, too alluring to refuse. The horse, silent and gleaming, feels like an invitation to ruin, and you shiver as you watch the Trojans haul it inside. You find yourself inside the grand palace of Troy, its marble floors echoing with footsteps that carry the weight of celebration. But it's hollow, brittle, like a mask stretched too tight. The feast is in full swing. Wine flows freely, lamps burn bright, and the air is thick with laughter, music, and the scent of roasted meats. Yet every sound feels forced, as if the city itself holds its breath, waiting for a crack to appear. At the center sits King Priam, surrounded by nobles and warriors, but you can't shake the feeling that none of them truly trust one another. The Trojan horse gleams just beyond the city gates, a silent monument that both excites and unnerves them. Then you catch sight of Cassandra, Priam's daughter, her eyes wide, haunted, desperate. She stands at the edge of the gathering, wringing her hands, lips parted to speak, but every time she tries to warn the others, they laugh or turn away. Her curse has doomed her. She can see the future, but no one believes her. It's a betrayal more suffocating than any spear thrust. She alone knows the danger lurking inside the horse, but her warnings fall on deaf ears, dismissed as hysteria or prophecy best ignored. Here's a historical fact to anchor this tale. Cassandra's story reflects ancient anxieties about women's voices being ignored, especially when they challenge the authority or desires of men. Her curse, that truth will go unheard, is a powerful allegory for how societies have silenced inconvenient warnings, especially when ignoring them offers comfort or expedience. Historians still argue whether this narrative was used to caution against ignoring wise counsel or simply a plot device to amplify tragedy. One quirky detail: some ancient sources claim Cassandra was once desired by the god Apollo, who granted her the gift of prophecy, but when she spurned him, he cursed her so that no one would believe her warnings. It's a strange twist of love, rejection, and vengeance, where a divine gift becomes a lifelong punishment. A fringe interpretation suggests that Cassandra's plight may reflect ritual roles of priestesses whose spiritual authority was undermined by political power structures. Her isolation could encode the fear that women's sacred knowledge, healing arts, fertility rites, seasonal patterns would be dismissed once societies shifted toward patriarchal rule. You notice how the city's revelry masks the dread simmering just beneath the surface. Warriors drink and toast, women laugh too loudly, and musicians play tunes that distract from the unease curling through the corridors. Even Priam, noble and seasoned, shrugs off Cassandra's warnings with weary dismissal. Their denial is almost unbearable to watch, as if they'd rather gamble with doom than face the uncomfortable truth she brings. The irony is sharp. You feel it like a chill wind slipping past the banquet curtains. The very signs of danger are right before them, shining in the polished wood of the horse and whispered through Cassandra's frantic warnings. Yet their pride, fatigue, and longing for peace blind them to the threat. This isn't betrayal by force. It's betrayal by neglect. The tragedy here is that the warning was there all along, whispered, begged for, shouted, but ignored. Cassandra's loneliness feels like an abyss, and you realize that sometimes betrayal doesn't come from a knife or dagger. It comes from silence, from a choice not to listen. As you sit quietly, watching Cassandra's eyes fill with tears she can't voice, you wonder how often disaster stems not from what's done, but from what's left undone. Warnings unheard, fears dismissed, truths buried under laughter and wine. You feel the walls closing in, the music souring, the lamps dimming. The betrayal isn't just in the horse. It's in the hearts that choose blindness. You walk through Troy's narrow streets, past shuttered shops and balconies draped with garlands, and the atmosphere feels less like celebration and more like a fevered dream. The wooden horse looms in the distance, still unexamined, still unchallenged, and everyone seems desperate to pretend it's harmless. You catch the scent of oil lamps burning low, the faint tang of sweat from exhausted soldiers, and the nervous breath of children peeking from behind doorways. Hope and dread mingle in the air like smoke from a fire no one dares to extinguish. That's when you hear the whispers. Talk of omens, of strange dreams, of beasts crying out in the night. Some speak of lightning flickering unnaturally over the city, others of the sea turning red at dawn. But when these rumors are shared, they are dismissed with uneasy laughter, as if speaking them aloud would give them power. The citizens of Troy are caught in a trap of their own making. Their desire to believe they've triumphed has overridden every caution, every prayer, every instinct to question what's too good to be true. You stop beside a group of elders arguing in hushed tones. One warns that the horse is a trick. Another counters that rejecting it would invite divine wrath. Their voices are tense, faces drawn with worry, but none wants to challenge the crowd. The fear of looking cowardly, or worse, of admitting they might have been deceived, keeps them silent. Betrayal, you realize, doesn't always come from an external enemy. Sometimes it festers inside, where pride and denial conspire to keep truth at bay. Here's a historical fact that grounds this scene. In many ancient societies, omens and prophecies played central roles in decision-making. Leaders often faced the dilemma of whether to act on unfavorable signs or suppress them for the sake of morale. Historians still debate how much political ambition, economic pressure, or religious obligation influenced such choices. A quirky detail? Some later versions claim that Troy's walls themselves seemed to pulse with unease, as if the city's stones could feel betrayal coming. Others speak of horses neighing through the night in unnatural tones, a warning drowned by cheers. Scholars argue whether these elements were late embellishments to heighten the drama or reflections of older superstitions about animal spirits and divine warning. A fringe interpretation suggests that the Trojan horse story encodes anxieties about collective denial, how groups convinced of their righteousness suppress dissenting voices, leading to self-destruction. In this reading, Troy's fate isn't sealed by clever warfare, but by the citizens' unwillingness to confront uncomfortable truths. You wander further, brushing past stalls filled with golden trinkets hastily arranged to welcome visitors. Children play games with sticks, imitating battles, unaware that doom shadows their laughter. Mothers gather at fountains, exchanging fearful glances but offering hollow reassurances. Even the priests seem distracted, muttering chants without conviction, their hands faltering on ritual implements. What's unnerving is that betrayal here is communal, born not from malice but from a desperate need to believe in salvation. Every glance avoided, every unease swallowed, every doubt silenced adds another layer to the deception. It's as if the city has woven its own noose, tightening it with every lie told for comfort. As you walk past the last of the torches, you feel the dread settle deep into your bones. The silence isn't peaceful, it's suffocating. The betrayal isn't loud or bloody. It's slow, quiet, and everywhere. You wonder how often civilizations, ancient or modern, have walked willingly into ruin because hope outweighed caution. How often has betrayal been disguised not by an enemy's blade, but by the comforting lie we tell ourselves? You glance back one last time at the looming shape of the horse against the darkening sky and shudder. The city's fate is sealed, and it's not the enemy that will destroy them. It's the choices they made in the name of belief. You step into the grand halls of Mycenae, where gold glitters from every surface, on swords, on goblets, on the inlaid patterns of marble walls. But it feels cold, lifeless, like treasure that has been cursed rather than cherished. The house of Atreus sits heavy with secrets, its air thick with murmured names, veiled accusations, and the brittle smiles of kinship stretched thin by suspicion. Here, betrayal isn't a single act. It's a legacy, a disease passed down from one generation to the next, infecting hearts and minds until trust is a distant memory. You feel it clinging to the curtains, dripping from crystal lamps, whispered behind closed doors. This is not a home. It's a labyrinth built from greed, lust, and revenge. The tale begins with Atreus and Thyestes, brothers bound by blood and torn apart by ambition. Their rivalry is rooted in inheritance disputes and promises broken. When Thyestes seduces Atreus' wife, betrayal is no longer an isolated wound. It becomes a festering, all-consuming poison. Atreus' vengeance is monstrous. He lures Thyestes back into his confidence, offers him hospitality, and then, most horrifically, serves him the flesh of his own sons. The banquet table, again, becomes a site of unspeakable treachery, as familial bonds are desecrated by revenge masked as hospitality. You shudder, but the story doesn't end there. The curse lingers, passed from generation to generation. Agamemnon, Atreus' son, is later murdered by his wife, Clytemnestra, and her lover, an echo of the same betrayal that poisoned his father's soul. Orestes, Agamemnon's son, returns to avenge his father, only to be tormented by guilt and pursued by the Furies, embodiments of vengeance itself. The house of Atreus becomes a cycle with no end, a web spun by the sins of fathers and mothers, children and lovers alike. Here's a historical fact that grounds the myth. Many Greek tragedies explored themes of inherited guilt and the consequences of unchecked ambition, reflecting real anxieties about dynastic succession, political power struggles, and the moral obligations of kinship. The idea that curses or familial sins could pass from generation to generation mirrors concerns about how private actions reverberate through public life. Historians still debate whether this myth reflects actual conflicts among ancient ruling houses or functions as moral allegory. A quirky detail? Some sources say that the Golden Fleece, sought by Jason and the Argonauts, was originally part of the spoils of the House of Atreus' cursed wealth, a shining but tainted relic that only deepened their doom. Others link the curse to ritual practices involving animal sacrifice gone awry, with the gruesome banquet perhaps rooted in distorted rites. A fringe theory suggests that the House of Atreus represents an early critique of patriarchy itself, that the cycle of violence reflects the desperation of women trapped in political marriages and men consumed by power struggles. In this reading, curses are metaphors for systemic oppression, with betrayal arising not from individual wickedness but from cultural structures designed to fracture trust. What's most chilling is how betrayal in this house is normalized. Generations live under the same roof, bound by duty, yet every meal, every conversation, every alliance is tainted by secrets. Love becomes weaponized, loyalty questioned, and kinship turned against itself. As you move through the dim corridors, you feel the weight of centuries pressing on your shoulders. The golden hallways seem less like palaces and more like tombs, echoing with the footsteps of those who plotted, wept, and died without resolution. You wonder how often betrayal survives not because it's spectacular, but because it's buried deep within everyday life, passed from parent to child, generation to generation, until its poison becomes indistinguishable from family tradition. The House of Atreus isn't just a story of violence. It's a warning etched in gold and blood about how betrayal, when allowed to fester, becomes the foundation on which entire families collapse. You wander into a misty forest at the edge of Thessaly, where ancient trees loom like sentinels and the scent of damp earth clings to your skin. The silence is thick, broken only by the occasional call of birds and the distant crackle of branches underfoot. It feels as though the woods themselves are listening, holding secrets in their shadowed depths. Here, hidden among twisted roots and fallen leaves, is one of the more personal, heartbreaking betrayals. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice, lovers bound by music and trust, undone by doubt. You find Orpheus seated beside a river, his lyre resting in his lap. His fingers trace the strings absently, as though playing forgotten melodies that once lured gods and spirits alike. His eyes are hollow, haunted by memories of love lost and promises broken. You sit beside him and feel the ache radiating from him like a low, mournful vibration. The forest around you seems to mirror his grief, its stillness a solemn tribute to what was, and what was lost. The betrayal here is quieter than bloodshed or revenge, but no less devastating. Orpheus loved Eurydice with a devotion that transcended life itself. When she died from a snake's bite, his grief drove him to the underworld, where his music softened the hearts of Hades and Persephone themselves. They allowed him to take her back, but on one condition: he must not look back at her until they reached the world of the living. Trust was the key, the fragile thread holding life and death together. But as they ascended, doubt gnawed at him. Was she truly behind him? Had the gods tricked him once again? The tension grew unbearable, and at the final step, Orpheus turned to look. The moment his eyes met hers, she vanished into the shadows forever. His trust dissolved in an instant, undone by anxiety and fear. Here's a historical fact that grounds the myth. In Greek thought, Orpheus symbolized the transformative power of art and music, an artist capable of bending nature and even death through harmony. His story reflects anxieties about mortality, the limits of human control, and the tension between reason and emotion. Historians still debate whether the myth emerged from actual cult practices surrounding death and the afterlife or was crafted to explore the fragility of human resolve. A quirky detail: some ancient traditions claim that Orpheus' songs could charm not only gods but animals, rivers, and stones. Even the trees bent toward him as if listening in rapture. Others speak of his severed head continuing to sing after his death, a haunting image that underscores how art, even in ruin, refuses to die. A fringe theory suggests that Orpheus' failure to trust reflects broader cultural anxieties about the dangers of self-doubt. Some scholars link it to rites of passage in which young initiates were tested not only by endurance but by their ability to suppress fear and anxiety. What's heartbreaking is that the betrayal wasn't deliberate. It was born of love, devotion, and a desperate urge to confirm what his heart feared most. He didn't turn out to be a villain or a monster. He turned out to be human. As you sit with him by the river's edge, the water lapping softly at the stones, you feel the unbearable tenderness of the moment. Trust, you realize, is a flame easily extinguished by fear, and betrayal doesn't always come from malice. It can sprout from uncertainty, from the mind's restless questioning. You wonder how often people destroy what they cherish most by doubting it. How often trust collapses not because someone seeks to deceive, but because love, too afraid to lose, suffocates itself. The forest around you seems to sigh with grief, as if it knows how fragile hope is, how easily promises are broken not by design, but by the trembling hands of fear. You climb the rugged cliffs of Mount Olympus, where cold winds whip your hair and the clouds swirl like restless spirits around jagged peaks. The sky above is a deep cobalt blue, punctuated by gleaming eagles circling in silence, and the scent of pine needles mixes with the sharp tang of frost. You pause at a narrow ledge where the earth drops away, and below you, the world stretches out in dizzying vastness. It's a place of splendor, and of secrets whispered among the immortals. Here, betrayal takes on a divine form, one that shakes not kingdoms, but the very heavens. You find Zeus seated on a stone throne carved from the mountain's heart, his beard flowing like snowmelt, his eyes sharp and bright with calculation. He watches the skies with a quiet intensity, but there's something guarded in his posture, as if power itself demands vigilance. The gods around him laugh and share wine, but beneath the glittering camaraderie lies a web of intrigue and desire. Betrayal among the gods isn't a sudden act. It's woven into the fabric of their relationships. A dance of favors exchanged, promises made and broken, and affections pursued at the expense of loyalty. The most infamous betrayal here involves Zeus' own brother, Cronus, who once ruled over the Titans. Fearing that his offspring would overthrow him, as prophecy foretold, Cronus devoured each newborn child at birth, one after another, locking away love and trust inside his belly. Only his youngest, Zeus, was spared through trickery, hidden by his mother Rhea and raised in secrecy. Later, Zeus would rise up, lead a rebellion, and cast Cronus down from power, imprisoning him deep within Tartarus. The betrayal cuts both ways. Fear drives Cronus to consume his own children, while Zeus' revolt is fueled by the need to escape his father's wrath and reclaim what was stolen. Here's a historical fact that anchors this tale. Myths of divine family betrayals often reflect real anxieties about succession, inheritance, and power struggles within aristocratic or tribal societies. Many ancient cultures feared that rulers would sacrifice heirs or enact violent purges to secure their own dominance. Historians still debate how much these myths mirror political realities versus symbolic storytelling. A quirky detail? Some accounts say that Zeus tricked Cronus by feeding him a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, allowing the baby god to grow up in hiding. Others speak of mystical herbs, enchanted caves, and secret guardians tasked with raising him beyond the eyes of his father. A fringe theory suggests that Cronus' act of devouring his children represents agricultural cycles, seeds buried and consumed by the earth, only to rise again with the seasons. In this interpretation, betrayal is not malicious but part of the natural order, feared because it mirrors the hidden processes of life and death. What's chilling is how betrayal here is tangled with survival. Cronus' fear of being overthrown drives him to horrific acts, while Zeus' rebellion is born of necessity, a desperate attempt to reclaim agency and freedom. The gods aren't purely good or evil. They are vulnerable to fear, ambition, and desperate love. As you sit beside Zeus, the wind tugging at your cloak, you realize how betrayal among the divine mirrors human frailty. Even gods are haunted by the same insecurities that plague mortals. The fear of losing power, the need to control what cannot be tamed, the ache to protect loved ones at any cost. You wonder how often betrayal is less about cruelty and more about survival, how fear can twist love into violence, and how even the strongest among us are shackled by prophecy and paranoia. The clouds gather thick around you, and the mountain's silence feels heavier than ever before. Betrayal, it seems, isn't reserved for the battlefield. It resides in the heart of power, in the minds of rulers, and in the shadows cast by their longing to hold on, at any cost. You stand at the edge of a windswept plateau, where the horizon seems to stretch endlessly into a twilight haze. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of crushed herbs and distant rain, and the sky is painted with streaks of rose and indigo as the last light fades. Before you sits Hades, lord of the underworld, cloaked in shadow and silence. His eyes are neither cruel nor kind. They are watchful, patient, and haunted by secrets that never sleep. Around him, spirits drift like wisps of smoke, whispering regrets and lost hopes, while the rivers of the dead move slowly through unseen caverns. This is the heart of betrayal, not loud and bloody, but eternal, patient, and unforgiving. The greatest betrayal here is that of Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. She was gathering flowers in a meadow when Hades emerged from the underworld, rising from the earth's depths in his chariot drawn by dark horses. Without warning, he seized her and carried her away, burying her among shadows where the sun never reaches. For Demeter, it was a betrayal so deep it stopped the earth itself. Crops withered, rivers dried, and famine spread as her grief engulfed the land. The world's lifeblood was drained by a father's helplessness and a mother's despair. You sit beside Hades and ask why he did it, not with words, but with a quiet understanding. He does not deny his actions. He speaks softly, as if explaining a decision shaped by loneliness and longing rather than conquest. In some versions, he desired her out of love. In others, he acted from duty, fulfilling a pact that bound gods to one another. Whatever the reason, the result is a betrayal that fractures worlds. Love twisted into captivity, duty warped into abduction. Here's a historical fact to anchor the story. Ancient myths often explain natural cycles through divine narratives. Persephone's descent into the underworld and eventual return symbolized the changing seasons, her absence bringing winter's barrenness, her return heralding spring's renewal. Historians still debate how much the myth reflects agricultural rites, funerary practices, or broader anxieties about fertility and mortality. A quirky detail? Some ancient texts claim that Persephone ate pomegranate seeds offered by Hades, binding her to the underworld and forcing her to return each year. The fruit's deep red flesh became a symbol of life's cyclical bonds, and of how a small act can seal one's fate forever. A fringe interpretation views the myth as a coded allegory about consent, power imbalance, and the complexities of marriage alliances among ruling families. Others suggest it encodes seasonal rituals where young maidens symbolically die and return to ensure agricultural abundance. What's heartbreaking is that betrayal here isn't just about force. It's about choices constrained by circumstances, by promises made before understanding the consequences. Demeter's anguish, Hades' loneliness, and Persephone's divided heart reveal how betrayal can be layered, shaped by love, duty, fear, and fate. As you sit beside the Lord of the Dead, the rivers of souls flowing silently past, you feel the weight of grief that never quite lifts. The betrayal lingers, not in screams or swords, but in the endless cycle of absence and return, in promises broken and remade each year with the turning of the seasons. You wonder how often betrayal isn't a single moment, but a lifetime of compromises and wounds hidden beneath smiles, gestures, and silence. How often love can be twisted into captivity, how promises can become chains, how even the gods must carry the scars of longing and regret. The sky darkens further, and the last embers of daylight dissolve into night. Hades' eyes, steady and sorrowful, meet yours, and you realize that betrayal's true power lies not in its violence, but in its quiet persistence, in how it lingers long after the moment has passed. You breathe in the cool night air, feeling the ache settle deep inside you as the underworld hums with secrets, and you know that even the gods, crowned and immortal, are not free from betrayal's reach. You settle beside a gentle fire as the night deepens, and the stories begin to dissolve into soft shadows around you. The betrayals you've witnessed today are not loud, not dramatic spectacles of clashing swords and shattered thrones. They are quieter, more insidious, born of fear, pride, grief, longing, and desperate love. You feel the weight of each tale, not as a burden but as a reminder that trust, once fractured, leaves marks that never fully fade. The gods and heroes you've walked beside are flawed, haunted, vulnerable, much like us. Their betrayals came not only from anger but from helplessness, from choices made in panic or despair, from promises that crumbled under pressure. And yet, in their pain, you glimpse something universal. How often we stumble, how easily fear clouds judgment, and how our deepest bonds can unravel without warning. As the fire's glow softens and the forest hums quietly beyond, you feel your own heart loosen. You realize that betrayal isn't always about malice. It's about human frailty, the longing to protect, to belong, to survive. Even gods are trapped in the same cycles, haunted by love and fear. Let the weight of these stories settle gently upon you. Breathe in slowly. The night is quiet now, and the secrets of the past feel distant, like whispers carried on the wind. Tomorrow's sun will rise, and with it, the world will feel lighter. Sleep well, knowing you've shared the burdens of heroes, mothers, lovers, and kings, and that you are not alone in the quiet ache of betrayal.